Hey everyone, and welcome to Chapter 4 of this Blender Visual Effects course. I'm super excited about today's chapter because we're going to be taking a look at how to create this amazing shot all inside of Blender. And so literally everything from the animation, the assets, to even the compositing was all done inside Blender. And so hopefully this will showcase an amazing workflow that you can use on your own visual effects. Now at the very end of this chapter, I actually have a special kind of section where we talk about some of the next steps that you can take with your visual effects career. I'll actually be showcasing how I would do this specific shot using some other programs outside of Blender, and so we'll be talking about some of the best programs that you can use for specific use cases to get an amazing looking film ready shot. And so let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, before we go ahead and jump inside Blender, I wanted to talk about the add-on that we're going to be using today, which is the BlenderKit add-on. And so this add-on is an amazing third-party asset library for Blender, to where we can literally search up whatever object that we want and then click and drag it into our scene with one click. And so it's an amazing way to speed up your workflow when you're talking about add-ons. And so, of course, we're going to be using the free version of it today, and so all of the free assets that it offers. But, of course, it does offer a full library of all these high-quality assets, and so I highly recommend you guys check that out. I'll actually have an affiliate link in the course files where you can get 10% off your final order if you are interested in that. And so no matter if you are doing the free or the paid version, you just want to click that link and go ahead and download the BlenderKit add-on right here. And then, of course, let's go inside of Blender. So now inside of Blender, we need to go ahead and enable that add-on. So let's come up to Edit and then Preferences and to Add-ons. This is where we install any add-on. Of course, we just want to go ahead and hit Install up here and then locate that zip file that you have installed from that website and then install the add-on here. And so you should get a window that pops up once you have installed the add-on that looks like this. You just want to go ahead and click inside of here. Do make sure it is checked by default. And then, of course, this is where you can log in, sign up, anything. If you do have the full version, this is where you can go ahead and plug in your key, your license, all that stuff, and a lot of other settings that you can explore here. Of course, we do want to go ahead and save preferences just so whenever we actually go ahead and launch Blender, it'll automatically be enabled. So with that, now you should see a little icon up here, and this is basically the add-on. And so this is a whole asset library that we can use. And so say if we want a specific object, so we'll say like a cabinet, like that. We can type that in, and now we have all these cabinet icons. And so, of course, there are free versions and paid versions of some of these assets. If you actually come up here, you can choose which one you want to see. So by default, you might have this option. You should see that there's some lock icons here, and of course these are the paid add-ons. And so it's actually nice that it separates that like that. And so of course we can come up here and only show the free. And so now we have all of these, which are free assets that we can literally use to drag and drop into our scene, and it'll download it and all that stuff. And so that's just an amazing kind of tool set to use inside of Blender, and we're going to be using that some today to actually import in our objects for our specific scene. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to start from scratch. Let's do a new general file. And then, of course, what we want to do first is convert our movie to a image sequence. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to plus and then video editing, and then add our movie. Again, we've been doing this a lot throughout this thing, but again, it's always just nice to go ahead and convert everything into a image sequence just so it's a little bit easier to work off. So now you can see this is the video that we're working with. We basically just have a shot that goes up and kind of, pans a little bit, kind of a drone shot like that. So I believe for my thing, I didn't use the full video file just to, shrink it down into a more digestible clip. So I believe I started at 150 and then I ended at 350. And so just kind of a 200 frame range right there. And so now you can see this is the shot that we're going to be working with, and it basically just starting halfway through. So of course, since we're in video editing workspace, it's automatically set our frame rate, and then we're also at a standard view transform, so that's very good. Let's go ahead and export this out. So again, you just want to locate wherever you want this to be saved, so make a new folder right there, and then we can just do RGB and compression down to 15 is totally fine. I'm going to be sticking with a PNG sequence, of course, but you can do JPEG, EXR, anything like that. So now that we have this and the start and end kind of defined, let's go ahead and render the animation. Okay, so you should have a folder that looks like this with all of our images in it. So that is looking good. Let's go ahead and import that into a new project. So let's go to File, New, General, and don't save. Now we need to go ahead and camera track it, of course. So let's go and plus VFX and motion tracking. Then we can open up that image sequence that we just created. So I'm just going to hit A to select all those and open that clip. Now we can just bring some of these windows down. Of course, if you remember in chapter 2, we're going to be doing the exact same method that we learned in that chapter. So let's go ahead and set these scene frames, prefetch our footage, and then I'm going to go ahead and set this to standard view transform. Now we have this looking good. Let's go ahead and set all of our 3 settings. If you remember, regardless of whatever shot that I do, I always set these 3 settings right here. So let's match the previous frame. I'm going to hit normalize, and then the tracking settings section, I'm going to set the correlation to a 0.9. Just, all of these things just help the tracker actually track the actual scene. So of course, now we actually need to decide where our motion model and, pattern size and search size. So let's do the pattern size and search size first. So I'm going to hold Control and then click right here. And then let's hit Alt-S to reveal the search area. And so this is actually a pretty good pattern size. Of course, you do want to determine that based on how big the footage actually is. And so usually when I'm sticking with 1080p footage, these are the numbers I usually like to stick with. And so, of course, you can change those and make those bigger if you need to, but I don't believe we need to make them any bigger because all of these details are, all of them are going to remain in this little square right there. That's basically how I'm deciding how big that needs to be. So we can go ahead and delete those two. The location model, this is such a simple camera movement. Again, I didn't want to be too complex for this specific, chapter. And so we're going to just keep it on location again. Of course, you can play around with some of these other ones as well. So let's go ahead and detect some features. And then I'm going to decrease our threshold to a 0.01. And then distance we'll set to an 80 again. Again, we're just trying to get as many markers in our scene as possible. Let's go ahead and Control T or hit this little button down here to actually track them forward. Now we're at the very end of our footage. Let's go ahead and create a new set of markers and track backwards. So I'm going to detect features again, Control Shift T this time to track those backwards. And of course, now we have one at the beginning and the end of our footage. I like to also have one in the middle of our footage just to fill out that kind of gap. So let's go to frame 100. And go ahead and detect some more features and Control T, track those forward. We need to come back to frame 100, then Control Shift T and track those backwards. So now we basically have 3 set of markers all throughout our footage, and so we have a lot of data for Blender to actually use. So let's go ahead and kind of do a manual pass and make sure that these markers are actually following the scene. I will notice we have some kind of jumping ones up here, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete those. There are some ones down here that have a little bit of spikes right here, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete those as well. So now let's do our visual pass up here. And so let's look. We actually have a kind of moving river right here. And so a lot of the details right here are actually moving. And if you remember in camera tracking, we only want stationary markers. And so of course, since it's kind of tracking to some of these moving river objects, we need to go ahead and disable some of those. So what I'm going to do, let's go to frame 1. And if you hit C, it'll actually, export this out to where we can select these much easier now. So basically, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger and we'll just click and drag all of these markers on our river. It's fine if we're selecting a little bit of those over here, but now we can go ahead and hit X and delete all of those tracks. So now we can see that we basically just deleted all of the markers on the river. We actually have one more down here that we actually missed, so let's go ahead and delete that one. But now that should give us a much more accurate track. So now if we scrub through our footage, we can see that all of the markers are roughly staying in the same place and not moving at all. So we are actually ready to go ahead and get our first solve, because of course, without actually telling Blender to solve the 3D motion, we have no use for these markers. So let's go to the Solve tab. And then we need to select the A and B keyframe. Now, again, the A and B keyframe is the range where there's the most amount of movement or parallax in our scene. So let's just come here. I'll notice right around 50, we'll say 50 to 80 is where the camera moves the most, and it's going to give us the most amount of data to use. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. So 50 up here and then 80 down there. Of course, we do want to refine everything. So let's refine the focal length, optical center and radial distortion, and go ahead and solve our camera motion. Okay, so you can see that we automatically got down to a 0.51 for our solver. And so again, that's a really good, pixel solve error for our first solve. So that means that our track is going to be really good. Of course, I do recommend getting anything below a 0.3 pixel solve error. That is, really, really good, and we can get really accurate. So let's go ahead and clean that up and try to get that number lower. So I'm going to go to Clean Tracks. Let's push this reprojection error. Again, we're just selecting the top error tracks, and so we're going to get all those out because what that'll do is if we delete the top error tracks, we're just going to make this average solve error lower and lower each time we do it. And so for me, it's a 0.96. We can go ahead and delete that. and then resolve our camera motion, and hopefully with us deleting the highest error solve tracks, it'll push the average down. And so now we're at a 0.37. Let's go ahead and do that a couple more times. So again, clean tracks, I'm going to push this number up until we're just selecting some of the few top ones. So I'm going to delete that. Again, I am looking at this entire scene and making sure I'm not deleting too many. You can still see that we have a ton in our scene, and so that's how I know I can keep pushing it a little bit more. So let's solve the camera motion again. That should get us below a 0.3. Let's see. Actually, a 0.31. And so let's go ahead and do it a couple more times. So select that many. Solve camera motion. And down to a 0.24. Let's go ahead and do it one more time just to see how low we can actually get it. So like that. And then hopefully we can get below a 0.2. So let's do it one more time. Like that. Now we're getting at the range where we might be selecting some potentially good tracks. So I'm actually going to leave it at a 0.21. That is perfectly fine for our scene and won't provide too many issues. So let's go ahead and save the project, and then we need to go ahead and define a 3D space. So of course I'm going to right click and join the areas here, and we have nothing in our 3D viewport up here. So let's go ahead and make a 3D scene. So set up our background and tracking scene. So now you can see that we have all of these objects up here that it automatically created. Let's go ahead and define our floor plane, of course. So let's come out here. I'll just select 3 random points. So this point right here, this point, and then we'll select one on the background like this point right here. These are all kind of level on the floor plane. Now they're not exact. However, we don't really need to be that exact for this scene since our plane and our ship is actually going to be off the ground. And so the only thing that's going to be on the ground is we'll have like a little building back here. So let's go ahead and set that as our floor plane. And now you can see that's looking pretty good. And the biggest thing is we just want to check that our horizon line matches. And I could see that the grid roughly ends right around this section over here, which is exactly where our horizon line is in our footage. And so that is looking good. Let's go ahead and define the scale. Now what I'm going to do is we'll select 2 points here, and so 2 points here. Now I don't know the exact scale for this, but we'll say it's about like 10 feet or so. So let's go ahead and do like 10 feet to meters. And so that's like 3 meters right there. So we'll go ahead and just tell these 2 points set scale until these are 3 meters apart. And so of course that's kind of a default scale. We can of course change that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and I'm going to set a origin here. So set that point to be our origin, and then I'll define this point over here to be our x-axis just so it's rotated. Okay, so let's go ahead and come out to the layout tab. Of course, we do need to undo all the stuff that Blender automatically created up here, such as our foreground and background collection. Also, we can delete everything besides our cube and camera. I'm going to go ahead and delete the background view layer, and then in compositing, we're not going to be dealing with any lens distortion or any fancy stuff there. So of course we can just delete those 4 nodes as well, like we were doing in the previous chapter. Then we can go ahead and plug this, and I'm going to move this down here. So now we basically have this as our compositing tab. We can come out to the layout tab, and I want to go into the camera and background images right here. And then render undistorted off. Again, we don't want to have to deal with any lens distortion, so that's how we turn that off. And I'm also, while I'm here, just going to change the opacity all the way up just so we can see exactly what we're working with. So now, of course, we need to test our camera track. And so the way we do that is select our cube. I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode, A, G, Z, and control click that up 1 unit. Again, I'm going to say this every time I do it, but the reason we do that in editing mode is to actually keep our origin point on the floor plane. And so since we defined our floor plane, in theory, this block should track to the kind of top layer of that grass right there. So now you can see it, tracks that pretty well. The biggest, region that we're going to worry about is back here. So let me actually Shift Z, I'm going to move that back here. You will notice that our box is kind of disappearing, and that's to do with the kind of camera view. And so if we select our camera again, in the camera properties, you'll see that we have this clip start and end. The end is 100 meters by default, which is kind of low in my opinion. I don't know why it's still 100 meters. Let's change that up to like 10,000 or something. So now we can see the object much better. So I'm going to place my cube back here, and that is looking good. If we kind of play this out now, you can see that we're going to put a building back there, and so the building will be tracked correctly. And so now we know the camera track of our scene is actually correct, so we can go ahead and delete that. Now I do want to go ahead and make sure our scale is set correctly. So what I'm going to do is let's come out here to the side panel. Now, before we actually place in our 3D objects, I want to double check the scale is right for this scene, just because all of the 3D objects actually come with correct scaling inside of Blender. So we just want to make sure we copy and paste the scaling again for depth of field, motion blur, all of that stuff. It's very important to make sure your scale of your scene is correct inside of Blender. And so how I'm going to do that is let's come to the side view. There's this little tool set up here, the measure tool. And so I'm basically just going to measure out 6 feet. And so 6 feet is basically 1.8 meters. And so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click and then press Z to move it on the Z axis. And again, 1.8 meters. So I'm just going to place it like that. So that's about 6 feet in our scene. If I come to the camera view now, we should be able to kind of guesstimate and see if that is correct in our scene. And so I'll notice that, this is roughly correct in my scene. I might actually increase the scale a little bit. And so in order to actually go ahead and affect our camera, what we can do is with the camera selected, we can just hit S to scale that. However, now you can see that we actually have our origin point changing. And so of course, we don't want any of our origin or anything to change there. So what I'm actually going to do is Shift A, we're going to add a empty. Now an empty is basically just random object that's not rendered in the actual 3D space. And so we can use it for a variety of use cases. Of course, what we want to do for this case is we want to parent the camera to the empty. So with our camera selected, we can select the empty second so that the empty is highlighted yellow right here. And then if we hold Control and P, we can parent to object. And then what that'll do is now if we select our empty up here, we can scale that. And now you can see it's moving the camera along that and keeping the camera track data intact. That's very important as well. However, it's now just scaling to the origin point. And so no matter how we scale it here, it'll always keep that origin point. And now we can exactly position the scale in our scene. So if I'm thinking about a 6-foot person standing in our scene, I'll think they're roughly like right around this kind of size, in our scene. Because if we're looking at the grass, this is, I'm guessing the grass is probably half the height of a person. I don't know the exact dimensions, but basically I'm just looking at this and positioning that as double the length of our grass. So that is looking good now. And of course, if you ever do need to have your, camera selected, we can always select this icon right here, and then I'll actually select our camera. What I'm going to go and do is just make this unhideable in the viewport, just so we don't see that in our scene. So now we have the scale of our scene correctly defined, and we are actually ready to go ahead and deal with some 3D objects in our scene.